I'm not sure that I have a reason to write. It's compulsion, certainly, and it's something I do, and I can't imagine a version of myself in a possible world where I didn't write something. Maybe in another world I'm writing operas, and in another I'm writing scripts for comedy shows. But in all the worlds I'm writing. Because of this, everything becomes a trigger. The writing begins randomly, haphazardly, aimlessly. Gloria Anzaldúa writes about how she wrote as necessity, as a sort of tool for survival so as not to let others write her out of existence. And if your essence is words, what you get by not writing is non-existence. So I'm inspired to write by that necessity, by everything in its daily interaction with me, and the need to scaffold something out of that interaction. It's hard not to write when everything in the world is a trigger, but of course I can't write about everything, and I certainly don't write poems about everything. What gets me from jottings and fragments to poems is that sense of the cathedral, the image of something in the distance that may look and sound beautiful and that means something. And usually the cathedral's location is very clear in my work. For example, Brownsville, the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, these show up a lot in my poetry, and they are inescapable. What else gets placed in there depends on the moment and the trigger. Last year I was in Albuquerque for a work conference, and I was riding the bus, and I remember looking up at the Sandia Mountains and at the people in that bus and thinking about the poem Metro, although then it was just a fragment. And I was thinking about how that poem would connect to other poems I was working on or had recently worked on or was planning to write. We don't have anything like mountains in the Rio Grande Valley, but we have cognates, natural monuments, symbols, and idols. Things like the long state highways that look like turgid veins, the thousands of car dealerships and parts warehouses with names like El Pulpo and You Pull It, the colonias, of course, the farm animals penned next to neighborhood bars, all the fields filled with grapefruit and sugarcane and okra, the commonplace code switching of Spanish and English, La Llorona, the taco stands, and so on. Then I began to think of how those things have influenced me and how I am in a constant struggle to derive some sort of meaning out of them, simply to be able to live, whether that meaning is clothed in the political or social or some other garment. And I got to thinking about the notion of what it means to live here in this interstitial zone, and how that notion is not only place but concept, and how even as I was riding on that bus in Albuquerque and I was thinking of myself as a being split into so many pieces simply by accident of birth, and yet how those pieces could come together in an origin and a particular place and an individual. Anzaldúa makes a very similar point in Borderlands, and to paraphrase very badly, that writing is sort of reassembling yourself after some force has fragmented you into many identities. Writing is Mariology done with the pen. But I don't necessarily have any grand theme in mind when I write, and I'm not in the tourism business. I'm not here to say, Brownsville is wonderful because everyone eats from the same taqueria. Instead, I document, observe, I retell, elaborate, create. I do my part in keeping both myself and this place from disappearing. It took me a long time to get the courage to enroll in the creative writing program at UTPA. I have a career outside of academia, and for a long time I thought I didn't need a classroom to develop my writing, that I was just fine pursuing my career in government and then writing when I could. But the MFA taught me to structure my work, to learn to develop well-considered reactions to those triggers that I talked about in the previous question, and I think most importantly to learn from other writers in the process of writing. I'm so glad that I decided to pursue the MFA because I was blessed to have studied with incredible writers like Joe Haskey, Brian Allen Carr, Isaac Chavarria, Katie Hirth, and many others. You learn best from your peers. And the give and take of our workshops and discussions and readings was something that really I hadn't ever experienced in my academic life. Even though my academic background is in philosophy, the classroom atmosphere is completely different and it's more aggressive there. So it was something entirely new to me. And I was also blessed to have Emi Perez as an instructor. Actually, one of the poems in the collection called Spine is dedicated to her. Not only a wonderful poet, but an inspiring teacher. She connected me to Chicano and Chicana literature and art, and she was the one who introduced me first to the work of Gloria Anzaldúa. So, of course, that was monumental for me. I think, consistent with my thoughts about inspiration, I would call myself a stochastic poet. And by that I mean that I don't force myself into writing about a particular topic or with a particular theme. I go where the mental wind takes me. Nevertheless, we all bend to our habits and we all maintain an allegiance to our influences. So I would say that first and foremost, I am a Chicano poet, and I'll always be influenced by this valley, even if it happens to disappear or I move away in the future. I return to my roots, and I'm not ashamed to think I'll keep writing about the same things for many years, since there's so much to write about here. If I were to point to something that shapes me now, specifically it's the political and social climate we live in, not only in the Valley and the state of Texas, but in the nation as a whole. On the one hand, it's easy to think that we are approaching a level of incivility and anger in our national political discourse that we have never experienced. But then on the other hand, it's easy to remember that our country has always been this strident. So either way, I think I am shaped by a commitment to take part in the conversation, not to remain hidden in some corner where my words never say or do anything beyond the page. I hesitate to say that a poet should be political, so instead I'll say that a poet should be political, at least sometime. That doesn't mean that writing political poetry should exclude the poet from ever having to do anything else. Poetry can't replace hands. So I have my public service work and I have my poetry, and I'd like to think that although they do not directly feed into each other most of the time, their ideology is the same. I love Steinbeck because I had never read anyone who wrote about the migrant experience like him before. I think I read The Grapes of Wrath in elementary school, and it just turned me upside down, and it blew me completely away. And in poetry, certainly Whitman, James Wright, Wallace Stevens to some extent. I write a lot of prose poetry, so definitely Edson and Simic, Arturo Islas, Americo Paredes, Cormac McCarthy, and David Foster Wallace. There are many that I could think of. Well, this is a wonderful prize, and I was so happy when I first found out about it, because it honors the memory of really a giant, a migrant, a soul searcher, a poet, a philosopher, really deeply complex writer. And when I read the guidelines, I knew that the work I'd be doing was a great match, and that it would honor Gloria Anzaldúa's life and work. So, really, she's one of our own here in the Rio Grande Valley. I mean, she grew up in Hargill. She went to Pan American as well. So it really feels wonderful to be able to connect with her memory in that way, and then to find some confirmation in the value of my own work, and to know that my poetry again connects to her memory, that it can hopefully bring others to her work as well.